Hi, I'm Dr. Joel Kreisberg, and I'm here with my colleague Reggie Marra. And what we're going to talk about today for a brief conversation is how narrative healing works. Narrative healing is, we've been working with it now for a couple of years as an approach to coaching with our clients, whether that's, in my case, healing, or Reggie works with lots of different types of clients. And interestingly, I'm a professional healer, and Reggie's a professional author. So we put this thing together as a way of really accessing powerful tools for helping people. And so I think of it as beginning the process of connecting with what I really understand I'm doing as I start to change in my life. Reggie, what comes up for you when I describe that?
First of all, I appreciate your pointing to you being a healer and my being an author. But what really comes up for me is I actually believe that everything we do as coaches has a healing connection to it.
Absolutely.
And outside of physical pain or anything, but whether it's a young entrepreneur whose story is keeping him or her stuck, whether it's somebody with certain kinds of pain or stress in their lives, what we really focus on doing is listening carefully to the story they have around whatever it is that brings them to coaching, and then work with them to reauthor or reframe or revise a new story that serves them better.
Absolutely.
I didn't really address exactly what you asked, I know.
That's okay. So listening, so when narrative healing begins with listening, but it's not listening necessarily to what I'm doing, it's listening to my understanding of how I'm doing it, which we're going to call the story that we tell ourselves, and then beginning to, through building awareness, which is technique driven, we allow someone to start to reauthor that story, right? And that's we have various techniques of it. I mean, some people want to think of narrative healing as writing, but it's more than that.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because one of the techniques we use in our class is we actually do some writing, but narrative healing emerges. It can emerge as a piece of writing, but it can also emerge as just my view of the world. It emerges as how I show up, how I carry myself.
In my process, how I carry myself as I change.
Yeah.
So that's a good time to introduce this idea that narrative healing is a paradigm shift from the more conventional perspective in healthcare, which is there's something wrong, I need to fix it.
Right.
And a narrative healing approach is, I'm not happy with what's going on. I may be suffering, or maybe not performing well in a work setting. How can I take that as an opportunity to grow? Okay, and narrative healing allows us to grow.
Yeah, and that's so important, because outside of or apart from growth, I believe healing doesn't really take place. Curing might take place. A doctor can come in and fix something like a broken arm and set it, but for healing to take place, some level of growth in my story, in the client's story, has to be evident.
So then in the process of learning narrative healing, we take these skills: listening, identifying the story that we're telling, where are the opportunities for growth, and then how can I write a story that includes the type of growth I want to see, and then what skills do I need to learn in order to succeed in that growth.
Yeah, so you just named, in my listening to you, I heard you just mention two things. My ability to see into or imagine or be aware of a new possibility for my story, and then the actual doing part. What skills do I need, and how do I apply this in living into my new story? Both of those are necessary, the awareness and the action.
Right, and interesting, both of those are actually a dialectical process. It's like you do some work with narrative healing on your own, but you do a lot of work with narrative healing in a conversation. So in other words, it's one of the ways of really learning about what my story is to have to tell it to someone. or to draw it for someone, or to paint it for someone, or to write poetry to someone, or there's a lot of ways of expressing it. So coaches are a natural fit. And so while we're, healer and author, we're both coaches. And it just seemed like a natural fit to introduce narrative healing to the coaching community.
Yeah, and I know in hindsight, just from a personal experience, the way I worked through issues in my own life, because I happened to be a writer and a poet, was to write it down and not write it down for a day or a week and be done, say, okay, that's healed. But the writing process for me, it happened to be writing, continued over time, and my healing evolved. You don't suddenly finish the healing process.
Well, that's really interesting. So in a way, as you write it down, you can see you're moving from your own experience to seeing your experience. When you talk with a coach, you are given insight into yourself. And then as you re-author and as you start to move toward those things, there's a way in which having that assessment and that conversation and those tools to continue that process and to stabilize that story is actually a really profound move for lots of people.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned sharing it with a coach, because the process involves, okay, something happens I want to heal from. I begin to express my story, maybe in writing, maybe in conversation. And part of the coaching process then, and this is where a coach has to be able to embody a certain skill set, a very skillful skill set. How am I then received as a client by this coach, and what comes back to me from the coach? That's a big part of that dialectic.
Right. And so this is not out in the middle of nowhere. We sort of put this together by looking at really a bunch of really important authors who have been working in this particular field for a while. I mean, just to name a few, there's Aaron Antonovsky's Salutogenesis. There's Brene Brown's work with empathy and sympathy. There's Louis Mel Madrona's work on narrative healing. There's Pennebaker's work, which is, really kind of sets the whole stage for narrative healing. There's narrative medicine. There's narrative therapy. So we've kind of pulled from a variety of different fields that use narrative. But in our world, it's the coaching conversation and the stimulating change toward the kind of fuller life that anyone wants to live, and that's why people seek coaching in the first place.
Yeah, we show up when we realize that, and it's important, I think, to say that you and I, as professional coaches, have both been clients. So we have received coaching as well. We don't just dispense the medicine, but we also take it, at times in our lives. And we seek coaching when we realize that with all of our gifts and intelligences and whatever else we think we embody, okay, this has me now, and I'm stuck, and a conversation with a competent other might help me get unstuck and grow into a new story.
And interesting, because then it becomes recognizing that I need to do some narrative healing. I need to have this dialogue with somebody, actually. So you really start to increase your resilience, because you learn that when you get messages from your life, which can be health messages, but they can be challenges in lots of domains. It could also just be, stuff happens. It's like, somebody gets sick, or you lose a loved one or a loss. And there's a way in which you realize that, oh, now I need to do some work to understand what's being asked of me. Yeah. And I can craft a way of kind of figuring out and scaffolding, strengthening elements of self that will allow me to actually more fully integrate that experience and live a richer life.
Yeah, it comes down to that, and it's not magic. It's grounded in some deep listening, some intimate sharing, the ability to be vulnerable both as a coach and as a client, and doing some work.
How narrative healing works. I guess that was the title of the talk. And really what it ends up being, what we're describing as narrative healing, works because it's a conversation. It allows us to understand ourselves more differently, and it allows us to actually re-author ourself to be one that's far healthier. And that's something that I've been working to articulate a methodology for it. You and I have been developing this work with colleagues of ours. We co-authored a book on a very similar subject. And now at this stage, we're really pleased to be able to be offering this work to health professionals who really want to take the time to sort of understand the potential for healing in how we understand ourselves and how we show up for our clients.